So, okay. Yes, let's wait for a second. And maybe you can come a bit closer here. So, can I maybe I'll come here so I'm not standing next. So, okay, so today we have really interesting. Welcome everyone to this session number 7 on social aspects of Russia's war against Ukraine. And now we are going to have 3 presentations on issues that are really difficult to tackle. So how this war affects sort of Russian society and how Russian authorities are consciously, systematically trying to re-educate the population. And there we will have our first speaker, Jonna Alava, who is a doctoral researcher at the University of Helsinki and also researcher at the Russia Research Group at the National Defense University. So, okay, welcome, Jonna. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I've had a terrible flu for a week now, and that's why I'm here in Zoom. And would be so nice to be there with you. But anyway, my name is Jonna Alava. I'm writing a dissertation about the gender aspects of military patriotic education in Russia. This presentation is based on my 3rd article, and the topic is a bit different than written in the program. This study has been changing a lot as patriotic education has been a bit slippery topic since the beginning of the war. But last spring, I noticed that many new patriotic initiatives have been launched in schools. Before this, patriotic education has been primarily voluntary outside of the school curriculum. The war revealed gaps in domestic patriotic education, and now it is forcefully introduced as a part of the elementary school program. Its content is highly militaristic, which is used to seek support and justification for the war. If patriotic education was before the war some kind of abstract preparation for the war, upcoming war, now we are in the war, and the objectives of education have not only been actualized, but changed. It is no more innocent education of citizenship, but the means of warfare. I have started to think about the patriotic education more as a system than any educational program. By analyzing the hegemonic discourse of the ideological content of patriotic education, practices of power, and the ways of resistance, I try to understand how Russians are making sense of state patriotism at the moment. It is not an easy task, and I think nobody can offer any final conclusions, but now it's the time to gather material and find new methods and theories. And this study is one attempt to look at patriotic education from a different angle than before. So, research framework. My article is not ready yet, so this presentation is more about the idea of the research and some preliminary results. Questions are, what does the new turn of patriotic education mean? What kind of power is used through patriotic education, and what are the ways of resistance? Research material consists firstly of methodological manuals of propagandist lessons called important conversations. These documents represent the official state patriotism, the hegemonic discourse that the elite wants to impart to students. To analyze practices of power and ways of resistance, I have gathered material from different sources: official documents, state media, oppositional media, telegram channels of ministries, deputies, youth organizations, pedagogues, and activists. It is hard to say how representative this kind of snowball sample is, but I feel that things have kind of saturated. Although new examples of oppression appear all the time, I'm pretty sure at this point they fit into the framework I've outlined, kind of a new norm of wartime. I approached the topic with Foucault's triangle of power: sovereign power, disciplinary power, and biopower. Mona Lilja and Stellan Windhagen instead have developed this idea of how every certain form of power have corresponding resistance. And as a method, I have used discourse analysis. But let me first introduce what kind of initiatives have taken place this year. Last autumn, the raising of national flag and play of Russia's national anthem started in schools every Monday morning. The action was mainly justified by referring to the United States, where they have a similar rule, and by saying that the most of the Russian youth focus too much on Western values. This year there will be so-called advisors, savetniki in Russian, in every school. One of their tasks is to promote state youth organizations like Young Army for students. They are said to help the school stay more informed about what is happening in students' lives outside of school hours. They strengthen the trend that upbringing is as important as education in schools. Many keep them controllers of a ruling party, and Novaya Gazeta has called them school polytrucks. One way or another, they are one new element of control in schools. Last year, a new youth organization movement of firsts was also established. Its purpose is to form children's worldview based on traditional values, to teach love and respect for the fatherland, hard work, and legal culture. The aim is to reach all 18 million children and youth in Russia. President himself will be the head of the supervisory board. The movement is legally able to participate in the prevention of youth crimes. I don't know what that means in practice, but it sounds related to reporting and punishment. In the near future, the movement could be turned into similar organizational tool that Komsomol was, which recruited students for the army and supervised the ideological education in schools and universities. The inclusion of the youth military organization Young Army in this new movement suggests that the previous division into patriotic and military patriotic education is blurring. From this on, I think we can talk about the one entity of patriotic education, as militarism is so embedded in it. Furthermore, this year, Soviet-style military training lessons make a return to schools. The scope is 160 hours for middle school students. Students are forced to perform patriotic rituals. This is not an initiative but has been reported to happen in schools, universities, and kindergartens. Oppositional media have written a lot about these cases. Children have been put to form these jet signs, wear Soviet-style uniforms, chant patriotic songs, and participate in patriotic events. Soldiers from the military group Wagner have been speaking in schools, and there are national campaigns, for example, writing letters or collecting supplies and money for frontline soldiers. This is not a systematic practice everywhere, but it seems that there are large regional differences, and it also depends on how patriotic the teacher is. Teachers who refuse to keep these patriotic rituals have been fired, but it seems there is a free playground for super patriotic teachers to implement any militaristic ideas. Many experts have argued that this propaganda causes psychological damage to children. Also, textbooks, especially of history, will be unified at the national level this year. Special military operation will be included in the materials. Soon after the beginning of the war, Russian schools were obliged to hold lessons called important conversations, which deal with the special military operation. Teachers had to teach the lesson word for word, following methodological material, which can be traced back to the presidential administration. The main narrative offered for children is quite the same as for older audiences, and terms like demilitarization, denazification, and Russophobia are repeated constantly. Lessons were highly emotional, and children's fear was increased by talking about the genocide, bloody crimes against civilians, Ukraine's nuclear weapons, and hate toward all the Russians. Later, this important conversation was made a new school subject, which takes place every Monday morning after the flag raising and national hymn. These constant lessons are not as propagandistic as in the spring, but they represent the wider ideological trend of state patriotism during the war. I chose these lessons for research material as they have raised a lot of resistance, which was a bit surprised because I think the flag raising advisors would be quite triggering as well, but no. The Alliance of Teachers in Russia have written a lot about these lessons, highlighted misconducts, analyzed the content, and advised parents on how to avoid lessons. Alliance collected the address that militarist propaganda would be removed from the content of one lesson. Over 600,000 people signed it. Surprisingly, the address was successful, and authorities removed all the references to Ukraine from that lesson. However, later it turned out that the content was moved to another lesson. But anyway, this example tells that civil society is not so powerless. Most of these active parents and teachers are women, and even though women have a passive role in militarism, they have the power to negotiate. Dominant power cannot afford to lose the support of women as a larger group. As the given role for women is primarily in the mother in society, women use this role to fight back. This tragedy is not new. For example, mothers of soldiers have successfully used gendered discourse against the state before. Lessons are named, for example, Russia in the world, our country is Russia, media literacy, Constitution Day, Day of Heroes of the Fatherland, National Unity Day, symbols of Russia, and so on. All aim to unite students under the flag and give a very simplistic worldview about Russia as a besieged fortress. By law, lessons are not compulsory, even though many schools try to pretend they are. Still, many do not dare to miss classes. And if they do, there are so many new militaristic elements in school teaching, also in compulsory lessons, that every child would learn something about it. The objectives of these patriotic initiatives are to ensure passive support for Putin and the special military operation. The whole state patriotism is all about the rituals. It doesn't say anything about the real support for the war. The state expects people to submit, and many do so because resistance is dangerous. Rituals do not last too long or demand too much from one individual, and therefore they are acceptable for many. Patriotism offers a whole package of arguments for why mobilization is important. To send soldiers to the front line is the task of the whole village. People buy equipment because Russia's army doesn't have enough, but at the same time, this action is meant to increase the common patriotic spirit. Patriotic education explains these things for kids. Patriotic education offers a ready narrative, which we will surely see soon as more soldiers start dying. People's public grief must manifest according to this official story. By official hyper reality, I mean a hegemonic truth, ideology, or story that has nothing to do with reality. It's clear that Russian authorities accept only one ideology that people must repeat in public. The situation reminds the late Soviet official discourses, with its slogans and narrow views of the world. Lessons Important Conversation is a good window into this ideology. Patriotic education, not only in schools but in a society at large, is an ideological structure or a system, a social dimension of a state repression, which enables at least partial mobilization and ritualistic support for war and Putin. So far, this system enables an apparent unity of society and thereby continuation of warfare. I'm quite sure that this system of control will only strengthen as long as totalitarian tendency continues in Russia. The system also enables and legitimates the repression of citizens inside Russia. Patriotic education started to strengthen 10 years ago, quite innocently back then maybe, but now it's already familiar and acceptable enough in society to be resisted completely anymore. It is too late. What is missed? No, it's there. One priority of patriotic education is to guide youth to the army, both mentally and physically. The purpose is to narrow the gap between the citizen and the soldier. So I consider patriotic education as a sophisticated use of power. It is so complicated and large system, even industry, constantly evolving and growing that it's difficult to understand totality. Instead, I have started to approach education from the Foucaultian ideas of power and corresponding resistance. Sovereign power, disciplinary power, and biopower get all certain kind of resistance, and when power changes, so does resistance. First, sovereign power does not manifest itself directly in the patriotic education, but is, of course, in the background. Resistance towards sovereign power is similarly openly defiant, but can happen also in a silent force. There have been a few individual strikes in school. For example, one student in St. Petersburg was on hunger strike because he opposed to Jun Armia coming to his school. But I would argue that the direct resistance to power has decreased throughout the war as sovereign power has been strengthening at all levels of society. Resistance could be also silent, which works when people act individually, but in the same manner. Sovereign power can become non-effective as a result of widespread hidden and silent resistance. According to previous studies, patriotic education has never been very effective. Why would it be now? I find disciplinary power more attached to patriotic education as it is much about the correct training. The power of discipline monitor, examines, control, trains and punish individuals through institutions and scientific discourses. By rewarding improvements, the power creates an effective carrot and stick approach aimed to get individuals to discipline and train themselves through the values given from the outside. Resistance to discipline can happen in two ways. Firstly, individuals or groups can openly refuse to participate in the construction of new skills or organizations, which we have seen, for example, in avoiding the lessons of important conversations. The second way is the transformation social constructions into something else, which in turn is not useful for power. Everyday practices of resistance such as sarcasm, passivity, food tracking, and avoidance are typical for this resistant type. I have found example of this resistance in sarcastic YouTube videos made by students, in refusals to sing along national hymn, and in humorous comments on social media. However, as discipline is a dominant feature of society and it has a constant correction system for those who do not conform, this method is hard and tiring to sustain. Lastly, biopower or biopolitics means regulation of matters of life and death, birth and propagation, and health and illness to optimize the life of the population. in patriotic education in traditional values, which stress the value of nuclear families, encourage women to give birth and maintain traditional gender roles in society. Patriotic youth organizations promote a healthy lifestyle, sports, and useful civic skills, which be considered to be a part of biopolitics campaigns. In the case of biopower, resistance is about undermining population growth and production effectiveness. Resistance does not have a certain central planning or coordination, but they have a similar orientation that evolves from mutual knowledge and communication. These are, for example, the creation of new space, subcultures, and self-defense. In the context of state patriotism, I would count feminist movements, some mothers and wives of soldiers, youth, subcultures, and sexual minorities who comment patriotism negatively into these resistance groups. Also, leaving the country is a strong biopolitical statement. Biopower has visible gendered consequences, which are one topic of my research. But putting together different types of power and resistance intersect and overlap. They are all strongly found in the context of current patriotism in Russia. The ways of resistance are flexible and not always very visible to Western audiences who expect to see large demonstrations. We need to watch deeper and analyze small actions to understand how Russians are making sense of patriotism. There is resistance, and when there will be more space, these ways might activate and they hopefully become a part of public discussions and discourses. Because patriotic education comes so close to the people and Russians do not like politics to come too close, I think this is an arena where we can see changes. The relationship between the state and the individual in the framework of patriotic education could give us a hint of where the society is turning and what kind of practices are under the surface. Thank you. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jonna, for your excellent presentation. Would there be any quick questions for Jonna right now? Yes, Eva, please.
Thank you, Jonna. Do you hear me?
Yes, maybe.
Maybe you can come a bit closer. This is a bit complicated here.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. And I would like to ask a question regarding patriotism as a contested term, because there is one, of course, one extreme of patriotism which is permissible and necessary, and of course it can lead to another extreme which is chauvinistic. So my question comes from the perspective of moral universalist values. And where would you draw this line? To what extent, when it comes to upbringing of children, as you showed the first class, small children? So where is this where can we draw a criteria? What type of patriotic upbringing is permissible, and when it starts to violate moral universal values?
Okay, before Jonna you answer, put this camera off for a while because it somehow creates there's some problem there. Thanks.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yes, thank you. It's a very, very good point, a very good question, and very difficult to answer because I think nobly patriotism could be kind of a positive or negative, and it's maybe hard to draw the line between them, and the line can also move sometimes, but I think it's not my how can I say this? it's not my thing to like make maybe like final moral statements, but I think what happens in Russia now is a very negative one because students are forced to perform this, and everything is about the war, and students are, I have seen the videos, and more students are scared. They're scared the war, nuclear war and things, and I think this is too much from adults to rise that kind of emotions in children. But yeah, and there's a lot of hate toward Ukrainians in the content of these lessons, and I think that is not any kind of universal good positive patriotism. But yeah, that's a very good question, and maybe I have to open up that more in my article and think a little bit more about this issue. But maybe we can think everybody about this question more, and of course it depends on individual what is the good or bad patriotism for one. Okay, thank you.
Go now. We have time after all presentations to continue discussion, so then we would go next to the next presentation, which is Alexander Malinen, who was our research assistant here at the Russia group, and will talk about military political education in Russian armed forces. Can you help with this? Yes, thank you.
Hello all, dear colleagues and guests. I'm Alexander Malinen and master student at University of Helsinki. I'm majoring in Russian linguistics, and I work here as an intern here at NDU at Russia Research Group. And this my presentation is based on my working paper about military political training in the Russian armed forces. So, what is military political training? It is a system by which the national patriotic mood of the personnel of the armed forces is maintained and developed. This military political training was introduced by the order of the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, in 2019, and it replaced the previous societal training program. Military political training is quite radically different from societal training. The guidance documents for military political training describe more and more the ideal image of the soldier and which values the ideal soldier must hold. The societal training program was firstly introduced in 1993 and updated in 2005. And it was meant to replace the party political work of the Soviet army. So the Soviet legacy still kind of lives on. Military political training is weekly for the most of the personnel. Conscripted and contract soldiers have 12 hours in a month, officers 4 hours in a month, and civilian personnel 2 hours in a month. So we can quite radically say that it is systematical and it takes a lot of time. If I describe this in a few words, it can be described the following way. It is a system for Russian propaganda in the armed forces for the personnel. And interestingly, the military itself calls it propaganda and agitation. About the research, few words. In the terms of time, the review and research material begins with the 2018 presidential order. Thematically, the focus is on military political education, but the old system of societal training is examined to build a context in my working paper. The end of the review is October 2022, and the most important material of the working paper is the Russian Minister of Defense 2019 order and the study material for military political training, which includes textbooks and other publications. And maybe one of the most important, the curriculum for the 2022 prepared by the Ministry of Defense. The curriculum is yearly and it is updated throughout. The main objectives and purpose. You can see it on the slides. In 2018, Andrei Kartapolov of the Ministry of Military Political Directorate said that the aim of the renewed training program is to protect the personnel against the external information threats, to teach military history and the tradition of the armed forces, strengthen the traditional Russian spiritual and moral values, and raise personnel to become patriotic warrior citizens, the voin государственник. The voin государственник term is quite interesting, as itself says a lot about. Voin means warrior, and государственник is quite interesting term, as it states a person who supports state power and strong state unity. Few words about the Andrei Kartapolov. He was appointed as the head of military political directorate by the presidential order, and his task was to build a new system. He's quite a guy here because he said a lot of terms and basically he told what the system should be before the order of the Ministry of Defense. It is significant to say that military political education is not limited only to the armed forces. It also targets the families of the personnel, and especially the youth. The mention that the youth is one of the main targets of military political education can be found in Kartapolov's speeches and military political curriculum for 2022. The overall purpose is also to bring armed forces closer to the society. And in practice, this is implemented through cooperation with various organizations, with the paramilitary youth organization UNARMIA, which Jon Alva told about you, and the Russian Orthodox Church. There are also other traditional religious groups with which military cooperates, but they aren't as visible as Russian Orthodox Church. The teachers of military political training can affect maximum of 25% of the content of the lessons, and the Russian Ministry of Defense publishes some additional material in Armейский сборник periodical. Yeah, Jonna told about this maybe enough, so cooperation is justified in the following way. The future is in the youth, And according to the Russian perception, and according to Andrei Kartopolov and many others, the West is attacking Russia in ruthless information war. In this war, the traditional Russian values are threatened. Thus, the armed forces take these organizations under their wing to guarantee a future and to train loyal warriors for the future. Also, the mind of a child is easily influenced and shaped, so the Russian military wants a piece of that cake also. So in my paper, the conclusion is following. The aim of military political education is to blur the border between citizen and a soldier. The alienation of citizen and soldier culminates in the term citizen-soldier, which is the main goal of military political education. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, there are many contradictions between the definitions. As was stated here yesterday in a panel discussing the justifying aspects of war, many definitions and terms are tricky. Kremlin and Russia doesn't like definitions. But still, there can be found definitions and contradictions if you dig long enough. For example, traditional religious groups are not defined in the textbooks or anywhere else. But in curriculum for 2022, the definition is following. The traditional religious groups are Russian Orthodox Church, Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism. There are discussions about other religious groups, but they are often viewed in a negative connotation. There are also contradictions between statements and practice. Citizen soldier is a person who is ready to sacrifice himself for his country. In textbooks, there are many examples of soldiers who sacrifice themselves in combat for Russia. However, Kartopolov stated that military political training won't contain propaganda of self-sacrifice, although it clearly does contain it. Later, Kartopolov said the tradition of self-sacrifice has deep roots in Russian military, contradicting to himself. The Russian war in Ukraine is quite not yet visible in military political training, and I'm waiting for the new curriculum for the year of 2023. There hasn't been a lot of discussions about it, and in the publications in Armейский Сборник, there aren't a lot of articles about the so-called special military operation. There are some containing about information warfare and the recent events, but nothing much else. Previous research has been done by Arseny Svinarenko, a sociologist, and Jon Alva has done a lot of research on the UNARMIA. The guidance documents, textbooks, and additional material for the military political education are available on the website of Russian Ministry of Defense if you're interested. And the working paper on this subject will probably be published, I hope, soon. So if the topic remains of interest, further reading is coming. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We forgot to applaud to Jonna, I'm sorry. Would there be any quick questions for Alexander at this point? Yes, please.
When the war broke out, there were in the social media circulated like small handbooks of Russian soldiers, and
Yeah.
in that one there was also this concept of Satanism, that Russian soldiers are fighting against Satanism. So I wanted to ask you, is this concept of fight against Satanism somehow developed more in this curriculum that you?
I know about the booklet, and it was actually published also in one page of Russian Ministry of Defense. It quite rapidly got taken down. It was about 3-4 weeks there. I have still screenshots for proof that in that textbook they stated that Satanism, West is Satanism, and yeah. But the main thing that this doesn't really it isn't really seen in the official documents. They don't like definitions. They try not to define until the last moment. So there are slips, and they try to fix those if the discussion starts surrounding that topic.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for the presentation. And then we will have a colleague from Alexandria Institute, also doctoral researcher Emil Mitikka, who's doing research on Russian surveys. And now you will be talking to us on the problems of analyzing the survey data during the war. So, floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Present here.
Before I start, could this be taken off? Yeah. Maybe I use this moment to introduce myself and topic. So yes, my name is Emil Mitikka, and I'm a doctoral researcher at University of Helsinki and Alexandria Institute. Thank you. This research, this topic that I'm presenting today, it's based on my research article published earlier this year, but I have added some new. I have taken some new material also here for the sake of interest and not just to demonstrate the previous results. And what is missing here from the topic, as Katri already mentioned, is what survey says about the support for war in Russia. So after Russia's attack on Ukraine, numerous surveys have indicated that there is very wide support for this war or special military operation among Russian population. But at the same time, there has been a lot of discussion and realistic concerns about the reliability of these results of this survey. So one thing is that Russia is an authoritarian country, and also war in general is very politicized event. So the question is if people are answering these surveys honestly, to put it very shortly. And also many of you might have heard about imprisonment and harsh punishments for anti-war activism or statements in Russia. So one could of course ask if we can make any relevant observation based on this data in the first place. So I think that while it is true that these concerns are real and the fear and this social desirability in answering surveys might partly explain the level of support or the overall percentage, I think it's interesting that it doesn't seem, if we look at the level of support in different time points, it seems that they don't correlate like very strongly with repressive measures and the level of overall support. So here I have there's a level of war support according to different polls. So this dark blue color here is Levada Center surveys on the topic. It's a state independent survey organization. Then there's Xiom, which is Kremlin online with this dark green color, the level of support in different time points, and then Russian Field, which is an oppositional survey in this light blue color, and then last Chronicles project, which is also oppositional survey in this dark red, and the level of support, how it changes over time. So as we can see, that it has some effect on these repressive measures on the overall support, but still, for instance, this highly unpopular mobilization announcement has affected or dropped this level in some of these surveys. So I think it's a kind of interesting contradiction or something that could be look a bit further. So I think that there has been a lot of discussion with this war support service that the focus has been a lot of in the level of this overall support, so how many percentage of Russians actually support the war. But at the same time, there has been less attention on how different background factors are related to war support in this survey data. And I think that what was interesting to me as a researcher who follows Russia matters, it was that many of these surveys also publish their raw data, which allows us to look at these relationships instead of just looking at the overall support. And in my research, I wanted to see how socio-demographic, media consumption and economic attitudes relate to war support. And as research data, I have used 2 oppositional surveys, one state-aligned survey, and for this presentation I also wanted to see how one Finnish survey conducted for Russian speakers in Finland on the topic, what kind of trends we can observe from there. And here are the descriptive statistics for the data used in this presentation. So in this Russian service, they are this Chronicles, Russian Feed, and Xion, and then there's this survey conducted in Finland for Russian-speaking population. And the overall picture is more or less the same in this Russian survey, so the support level of support ranges somewhere between 60 and 75%. The level of anti-war stances ranges somewhere between 9 and 25%, and rest of the respondents didn't want to take a clear stance on the team. And when we look at the data for survey conducted in Finland for Russian-speaking population, and here just note, I have included only respondents who have Russian citizenship, either double citizenship or just Russian citizenship. And the picture is pretty much the mirror image, so 64% is against and 17 supports, and rest of them then don't want to say their opinion on the topic. And now moving on to representing these results of my analysis, and before going forward, I briefly explain how to interpret these graphs and the following ones with the similar layout. So the variable that we're interested in here is war support, and these are the background factors here, which are marked on this just on this text. And if the given variable value is above 1 and marked with this dark red color, then it's positively linked to war support, so it increases it. And if on the other hand it's below this dashed line of number 1 and marked with blue color, dark blue, then it's negatively affected to war support, so it decreases it. And the ones marked with gray color are not significant in the given model. And if we look at the results of this first oppositional survey data and the model built on it, we can see that information sources are highly relevant. So if you receive information on events from TV, you have a lot higher odds to also to support this war. And if you have on the other hand are receiving information from YouTube, for instance, or for people you know, then it decreases the odds to support the war. And what we can also see from here is that economy also matters, because those who have a kind of like more pessimistic economic attitudes or situation, for instance, they have prepared for a rainy day, or family income has decreased since the war began, or they are laid off from the work due to war, also then the resistance grows. And from the socio-demographics in this model, we can see that age matters to some extent. Here, 45 to 59 years old are more prone to support. Comparison category here is under 30-year-olds. And also, settlement size is relevant to some extent, as people living in big cities are more likely to resist the war. And what was interesting here, I think, was that Telegram as information source in this model seemed to actually increase the war support, which might tell that there are also other than anti-war actors in Telegram, and maybe respondents of this survey are at least like following some C channels material instead of oppositional, anti-war opposition channels. Okay, moving on to second data, second survey. This is again oppositional survey called Russian field, and here we can see that the list of variables is of course a bit different, but same trends are more or less present in here. So information sources are again highly relevant, as TV consumption or information from there increases the support, the odds to support, and information from YouTube, again, on the other hand, decreases it. Also we can see that from information sources, these state media, state websites are increasing it. Economy matters also here, because those people who haven't been affected by sanctions have lot less higher odds to support the war, and those who have been negatively affected then also are more likely to resist. And here again from socio-demographic, age matters. So 45 to 59 years from age category is also here positively related to war support, and also in this model female respondents are more likely to be against compared to men. Then moving on to this state-aligned survey called TIOM, this organization, and their data. So maybe a couple of words about this surveys by this organization is that the list of variables is not as comprehensive as in oppositional surveys. And there of course are some questions about how much this state relationship kind of affects the results. But anyway, I wanted to see still, since the raw data was available, what kind of trends we can see here from their data. And again, media consumption matters, as those respondents not watching TV daily are significantly have significantly lower odds to support the war, and also economy matters, since people with perceived good economic situations have higher odds to support, and those who perceive their economic situation not very good then have higher odds to be against. In this model also, from socio-demographics, people living in big cities are more likely to be against compared to people living in smaller cities. And age matters here as well, as the odds to support is growing with the age as well. And lastly, this Finnish survey for Russian-speaking population, and here people with Russian citizenships indicates that some of the trends are quite similar also for Russians residing in Finland. So here we can see that age matters from socio-demographics. Media relationship also matters, since those who don't have trust in Finnish media are a lot less have a lot less higher odds have a lot higher odds to support the war compared to those who do trust the Finnish media. And of course, Finnish media probably covers events in Ukraine and the war a bit differently compared to Russian television or media. From here, the main difference with the Russian surveys was that economic factors didn't play so significant role in this examination, but there are still some other commonalities like this high rates is correlated to higher support and also lack of higher education, and while on the other hand, if you are in the workforce or studying, then the odds to support the war are a lot less. Now, at this point, when we have examined these results or look at this, we can ask then, of course, that okay, why these results then matter? So why should we care about them? So, well, for the one thing is that, of course, for me at least, they might be already like interesting and politically relevant observations. But then if we can also use surveys to survey data and combine them with other kind of data and look at further how the relationships, what kind of trends we could observe. For instance, here I have just combined some survey data with population and geographical statistics, and we can see from here also as with the models before that when we go from big cities to towns or cities with less population, then the support rises, mean support rises significantly. We can see already that in less than 5,000 there are a lot more these like red dots, and they increase gradually when the population size is decreasing. And also, when I was doing this research, I looking at these results, I find it also interesting because not only surveys indicate, for instance, that economy matters. So there are already some research done on the economy and how sanctions affected, and there are some indicators that they actually are crippling Russian economy. And this is, of course, in a way good news if the economy or sanctions and economy matters also to attitudes to war support, because then we can maybe affect somehow to it. Okay, so to conclude, I think that besides of their limitations, these war survey data, they can increase our understanding on the domestic situation in Russia and on these attitudes toward war, and we can relate instead of just looking at this kind of like overall support, we can look at these relationships and include it as kind of like part of our monitoring tools in a way. And also, I think it's important to, besides of these limitations, I think it's important to notice that it's quite difficult to replace entirely these kind of data and methods with other data and methods, because if we look at the situation in Russia at the moment, many data that are coming from Russia are manipulated and distorted now in some way. So we just need to kind of like see how much we can stomach that kind of like uncertainty, and how we can maybe overcome some of the uncertainties, the ways to kind of overcome these. And lastly, some words of caution is that we of course need to analyze these and use this data with care and avoid superficial interpretations, and also so let's be also skeptical about standalone kind of data and numbers, and it's good to seek for general trends and relationships, because otherwise we can end up in quite weird conclusions. But since there are relatively much of this available, this data, it's maybe good to look what they could tell us still. Okay, I know this is a very wide topic, and there's much to still talk about, and I didn't cover very extensively all the possible limitations or uncertainties related to this data used in here. But I think I end this presentation now and leave some room for questions, and maybe we can discuss them later then. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward for your questions and comments. Thanks.
Excellent. So, Alexander, you also come here, and let's put it so that we can see Jonna.
Okay.
Okay, let me see. Is it like this? Yes? Great. Yes, we can see you. Good. All right. Good. So, thank you for all different, but on the other hand, on the similar topic presentations. I have again some questions to all. Maybe we start with my questions, and then we have questions from the audience. So if we go in the order of presentations, I would have first question to Jonna. I think you have now very nicely applying this Foucauldian kind of a theory complex to your topic. Only thing I was thinking is the very kind of fixed meaning of this, or the interaction between power and resistance, and there I was thinking that we discussed before that would it make sense to in a way take into account the idea of ritual and the ritualistic repetition of the forms without actually believing or in a way giving your support to these practices as a form of resistance, because the context is now Russia with the Soviet practice. So I'm kind of referring to the research done in the early 90s on how the Soviet ideology was resisted by this ritualistic repetition of the forms. So maybe I'm asking you to be critical also towards this Foucauldian framework of interpretation and apply it to this context. And it would be really excellent to get a representative amount of different examples of this resistance, because I think there is a critical issue with your article that how you can, so that it's not here and there something, but and then of course that's maybe the third point now it just came to my mind is that it is really difficult to show how this influences people's. We talked about it yesterday, the worldview and ideology, etc. So, and there we have, of course, a lot of previous research. But now the time is very extraordinary, and so it gives you, it is like a laboratory for you to research how this is. How this influences. So the main point was about this Foucauldian kind of theory of interpretation and how to make sure that it is applied into a context, taking into account the specific political context. But it looks very good, so really nice work that you've done so far.
Thank you, Katri. Yeah, I agree completely, and you're right. I need to bring more examples to the paper, and okay, there will be in the article then. But yeah, I think we must now learn more about these late Soviet practices, and especially the rituals and ritualistic practices. And I believe there is a resistance inside these rituals, and I think it's important to open it more at the current moment, and what is happening inside those rituals, and what kind of discourses rises, and how as we discussed earlier, like do people kind of repeat these late Soviet discourses and practices and rituals, or is this a really new thing? And it would be very interesting to understand that, how people consider like nowadays situation comparing to late Soviet times. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I was thinking like with Emil's survey results, there is an indication, like you said, Jonna, in your presentation, that women are more opposing the war. So in a way, the survey results give you background for this hypothesis, and also it's not just a hypothesis, but there are these examples. So
Some support, yes, to the argument.
yeah. Santeri.
Thank you everyone for the excellent presentations. I have one question for every one of you. First, I would like to ask Emil on, you mentioned that the data is manipulated sometimes, and I was wondering, have you looked at how it is manipulated? Can you like identify certain patterns there? And for Alexander, I wanted to ask about like sort of unofficial documents, like not official documents, but when looking at like early 2000s in Russia, do you see signs of like the military political training taking shape sort of outside and before the official documents? And for Jonna, I want to ask about like connecting the Emil's presentation to your presentation on like the Russian attitudes to the Armia and the patriotic education. Have you looked at like how the Russian attitudes have changed to Armia and patriotic education, and how are like the Russians' positions towards the education? So, thank you.
Yeah, maybe Emil, if you start.
Yeah, I can start. Thanks for the question. It's excellent. I can only give you some kind of like guesses how it's manipulated. But okay, I was referring with this manipulation. I was maybe not referring to technical manipulation, like okay, like distorting the numbers in some way or cleaning them, but maybe more to the kind of like social manipulation because of the topic and all of this like repressive legislation of speaking against the war, for instance. And also, if we talk about this state-aligned service, this SIOM, for instance, that they also conducted some service on occupied territories in Ukraine. Like, do you approve this, or do you think that it was honest kind of elections when they were voting for the kind of joining to Russia? And then this is like 90% is yeah, of course, and then they also published the raw data for this, but I wouldn't maybe analyze this data as very reliable, since like 2 weeks after there are like some of these areas are occupied again by Ukraine or taken back by Ukraine, and people are like celebrating on the streets. So this kind of like maybe social aspect to it, not manipulated in technical terms in a way. And also this social manipulation I'm referring to, if we think about like media data or something like that, there could be also some non-humans writing like bots, and in the media on the other hand, there's this distortion of kind of state controlling a lot of the discussion. So this is what I was referring to. I hope it answered at least partly to this question.
Yes, thank you for your question. And I haven't pinpointed out exact time frame when the change happened, but I mentioned in my presentation there was two orders by Minister of Defense. The 1993, in which societal training was started in Russian armed forces, and 2005 when it was updated. In 1993, the document stated that Russian military must tell about multicultural Russia and the multicultural Russia as a rich thing. In 2005, there wasn't any mention about multicultural Russia. There was mention about national patriotic mood. So something changed. I'm not quite sure what. More research should be done on that subject. And the 2005 was also interesting year because, for example, the TV channel Zvezda was opened, and many things happened in that time frame. But the societal training was quite pragmatic training actually. It wasn't ideologized. It hadn't like citizen warrior terms. It was just quite modern training program for resilience and psychic resilience and physical resilience and international law, and basically, yeah.
Very good. Then Jonna, again, this was a picture, but
Refresh the video also.
yes.
I didn't see Emil's slides, but I have read your research before, and I have to take a closer look at this research also. But I have noticed that like state surveys, this GEOM and others on patriotism, they seems to be also very manipulated. There's always this 80% or 80 something who support all initiatives, and there are no big differences between initiatives, and everything is okay. But what is interesting, I think, it seems like a big audience is quite blind to militarism, militaristic ideas, and like super or negative patriotism. But what they criticize quite openly is Soviet practices and Komsomol, and those that they are old-fashioned and they are not useful and they didn't worked back then why they should work now. And I think there is something to catch, like how people are making sense about patriotism. And yeah, about the women, there are militarism and patriotism is always very gendered, and there's a lot of gendered consequences, and especially opinions and resistance of women and men differs, and it's important to look what kind of consequences and differences there is. But yeah, that was maybe.
Jonna, I would have two questions, like to both of you, or one question for both. So maybe if we start with Emil. You had a very interesting combination of data, so this geographical and the small cities and big cities, and then the support for war. And it is kind of, I'm asking of your, I was kind of thinking of asking what is the quickest way to increase resistance to war or support for the war, but then with your data, we see that it's the small villages that already don't have a lot of welfare, where we also know that a lot of men went to fight there from these small villages. So, if can you kind of maybe open a bit more? What do you think are the main reasons for this? That I mentioned that there are no much perspectives in these villages. That it might be one reason for support of the war, but what do you think are the main reasons there? And
so you're talking now about this town size or these geographical differences. Well, what you already mentioned, that there is not so much to lose maybe, and of course if you go to war or somebody from your family goes to war, then it's psychologically I would say like quite hard to resist it or say that okay it's for nothing, because then it's like why my like son or somebody is dying there just for nothing. So it could be one thing, and of course like in these big cities, and it's also a global trend that there's more like urban lifestyle in big cities, and people are more liberal with their values in general. I think Russia is not very exceptional here in this like trend in as such. And also I think this is something that would need further examination, but I think this speaks quite nicely, like this preliminary finding on this town size with this 4 Russias argument, kind of,
yes.
that you should maybe not look at the geographical differences, like locations, but more of this like town size and also what kind of lifestyle there is because of this town size, and also because of what kind of interest there is, or this kind of.
I would say that this is really important conclusion, or at least maybe not conclusion, but preliminary hypothesis, because if there is like attempt to somehow try to limit Russia's war effort, and one way is to impact to the people, then it's very hard to get any impact on these small towns.
Yeah, it might be harder. Yes, in a way.
Yeah, interesting. For Alexander, I had a question, or it's maybe a suggestion that we haven't discussed. I just came to my mind that maybe it would make sense to, if sometimes continue this research, to look into these theories on civil-military relations as an overall context of interpreting what is in a way going on with this military education, because it is in between the even if it's targeting the military, it is sort of targeting the ideas of why you are making this as your career. And then it might be interesting to do comparative research. For example, these civil-military theories are often developed in the Western countries, and then try to kind of understand, are there different factors at play in Russian society, or is it just similar factors, and how maybe the history affects this? But this is now a bit like a suggestion rather than concrete question, but I don't know, you know the empirical material better, so
yeah,
how do you
maybe
think?
I should look into it, but also there is quite long history in Russia that Russia has only 2 friends, their army and their fleet, so
yeah.
It's from Tsarist times, and maybe it doesn't really the Western point of view. I don't know. I can't argue.
Yeah, it might be a good exercise to try to understand what is so different in that society, and what Jonna mentioned, the militarism and how it is not seen might be another way to try to tease out what is actually difference, because when reading these documents, it is, there are so many things that appear as self-evident, and maybe some kind of theoretical interpretation framework would help there. But I think very good work so far with your working paper.
Yeah,
so
thank you for your suggestion.
yeah. All right. Any other questions? So I'm opening the floor to all. I don't know if we are getting any. No. Questions from the out there.
Maybe some follow-up
Yes,
discussion?
yes,
from what
please.
you said between
Comments
this-
are also welcome.
Between this comparison of civil military relations in Russia and West, because you had in your paper this concept of citizen soldier. It also has different contexts, like for example, when we develop comprehensive national defense and let's say look at this model of Switzerland's total or comprehensive defense, they also have this citizen soldier concept, but it is centered around democratic values and democratic understanding. So probably it's kind of the same label, but maybe two different value systems between it. So yeah, so if you want to
Yeah.
look at it.
That's actually true, because overall we were in Finland. I went my military service, and maybe in Finland, like, everyone is this citizen soldier in some part, but it isn't defining factor maybe in democratic countries, and we know that we are purely defending, but
Yeah,
should be taken
and the
into
way
account.
the citizen part of that issue is defined in these different sort of documents, it's interesting,
yes,
and
it
this links also to the issue of this mental warfare that was mentioned in Dima. I think in Dima Adamski's
Yeah.
presentation, it is important part of this new trend in the Russian military writings. So expectation that you kind of are subject, object in a way of this certain type of thinking when you are a citizen. So that might be another issue to clarify in possible future research.
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, would you have questions to, or if you others have questions to each other, that's also one possibility, and then we just finish our panel and if we don't have any other questions. But
Right. I had one question, kind of comment for Jonna. So, well, you mentioned also, Josef, I know I'm a bit like maybe strict on the thing, but like the snowball method of gathering this data, like, and the representativeness of it. So you mentioned it. It's of course like you don't know if it's how precise is it, but I think that this is one of the maybe things that needs to be kind of like considered quite carefully when you do the further research on the topic in a way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm struggling with that all the time. But yeah, it's very easy to do a really real discourse analysis from the methodological manuals, but these practices of resistance, and I don't know, I have been thinking that half of almost 1 year how to gather kind of a really good data set, but because they are so fractioned in Russia and there's no real opposition and there's a lot of little groups, so yeah, it's a challenge.
Comment, so maybe some suggestion. I don't know if you have if there's some literature available or research available on some quiet signals might be like relevant reading in or to consider, because then you don't have so maybe big sample, but some that is more not all the things are equally
Yeah.
important in different things. So that's good. Yeah.
Let me if you have good ones.
Okay. If there are no any questions, I think we will stop here. So, thank you, Jonna, for your presentation, and thank you also for Alexander and Emil for
Thank you.
this was really interesting. And thank you for the audience.